Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Ag Forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, your premier platform for real-time global insights. To begin, I want to start off with a view of the northern hemisphere here, right on top of the North Pole. We can see that much of the last 45 days has carried a very warm bias across parts of Siberia, getting into the Russian wheat belt and then over into Europe. And then the eastern two-thirds of North America has also favored much above average temperatures. To kind of continue the discussion that we had in yesterday's long-range technical analysis, I want to come back to where the main storehouses of cold have been. If we want to see some sort of change in this pattern, it's got to begin first in Alaska and Greenland. And that's a narrative I'm carrying over from last time, but I want to show you the latest model updates at the end of this video on where that pattern is going. Before we get there, though, we have some bitterly cold air that is in place in the north central plains where temperatures have been ranging between -5 and -30 with wind chills much below that. In fact, there's a broad section of the country here today that's dealing with wind chill advisories and wind chill warnings. The main low pressure system will be exiting the eastern Corn Belt today, heading to the northeast, which will still keep a big section of the southeast quite warm. But the question is, how long will this colder air stick around? Because when it came through yesterday, it produced some pretty nasty conditions. This is from the North Dakota Highway Patrol, which closed to Interstate 29 between Fargo and Grand Forks on this ground blizzard. And visibility was reduced to just a few tens of feet here. And very difficult for travel yesterday. But the total snow out of the system was relatively light. We can see that in the north central plains are over the last 48 hours, maybe up to an inch and a half of total snow. But it was that very dry and very fluffy snow on the cold air. Huge liquid to snow ratios allowed it to just be blown around like dust. The other system that emerged out of New Mexico locally produced some very heavy snowfall in New Mexico, but then as it stretched from Texas and Oklahoma through parts of Kansas, Missouri, and into Illinois, you can kind of see, if I take my drawing off there, what the snowfall amounts look like through last evening. This system today will be pushing through parts of Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio before it moves on to the north and east. And we do have more snow in the forecast for parts of the north central plains, which I'll get to in just a few moments here. But I want to show you a pretty cool satellite animation. Now, this is yesterday midday through sunset, and you're looking right here on the border between North Dakota and Minnesota. And what I love about this animation is that the clouds had cleared out. What you're seeing here right in through this area is the blowing snow as seen from space. So this is what warranted the blizzard warnings that were out for much of the day yesterday in parts of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. It was on a ground blizzard with blowing around that very light and fluffy snow. Temperature change over the last 24 hours is pretty amazing. We can see a section of the western Corn Belt getting into the north central plains that have had temperatures that have dropped almost 50 degrees in a 24-hour time period. Reminds me a lot of a great book I read called The Children's Blizzard, which happened back in January of 1888. It's an incredible book if you like to read about weather events. Well, how long is that colder air going to be around? Well, we've currently got the wind chill advisories out for such a large section of the country in through here dealing with that colder weather, and the winter weather advisory stretching in through this area. The flood threat will continue in this area into the foreseeable future, and you can see all the different flood warnings along the river systems in the broad area where we have a flood watch. But by the time we get through the weekend, this is Sunday's departure from normal high temperatures. So as we've been discussing, any shot at cold air was going to be relatively short-lived, and that is certainly the case because we're going to get temperatures back anywhere between 5 and 20 degrees above average in the midsection of the country before we reload for another system midweek next week. So I want to add to this some context about our Great Lakes. Just look at the numbers that I have kind of posted up here in the upper left-hand corner. You're looking at a map that shows, what's covered in ice and what's not. And this color right here represents what is ice-free. And we're currently sitting at only 10% of the Great Lakes showing any ice. Last year was 55%. The year before was 63%. So this is kind of an artifact of that map I showed you to start this video with how warm things are. And I want to show you one last thing here before we work our way toward our rapid update. It's something I put in my analysis yesterday, but just to put context to how wet things have been. This is through February 10th, current calculated soil moisture anomalies, and this was a year ago. So when we just continue the dialogue about what our spring flood threat is going to look like, we can put it into the context of a year ago. Places that are different, Iowa, parts of the Ohio River River Valley east in Texas is certainly looking different from a year ago, but we still have a lot of excess water in the soil sitting on the Missouri, the Mississippi, and the Ohio River Valley in their watersheds. So just keep this in context as we move forward. Now, over the last 2 weeks, we have seen incredible amounts of rainfall down here. I made an adjustment on my color bar. So now at 6 inches, we're talking about that dark shade right there, and this goes all the way up to 24 inches. So we do have some places in parts of, well, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, getting up into Tennessee, Kentucky, all the way to West Virginia and the Appalachian Mountains that have easily picked up over 8 inches of rainfall, some locations topping a foot or more just in the last 2 weeks alone. So we come back to the initial question I posed, is anything breaking this pattern down? Well, if you start this morning and go through next Thursday, we still have at least 2 more systems to deal with and a third after that. The flow pattern is still set up in the same configuration over Alaska and over the North Pacific and over Greenland. So it's still coming around, a big high pressure cell that's protecting California. I shouldn't say protecting, it's eliminating the rainfall in California. Subtropical branch cuts underneath this, and so we have wide open Gulf of Mexico moisture transport, and we're still going to be adding quite a bit more precipitation to this area where it's raining this morning, and we're expecting 2 more systems to come through. So remember on this color bar, get into these kind of yellows here. We're talking about 1 inch plus of precipitation. So what is that pattern really looking like? Well, through the next 10 days, not much of a change. The deeper trough that's sitting here over Alaska, the same one that's sitting here over Greenland, which, by the way, this week is producing an impressive low pressure system in the North Atlantic. Well, that pattern isn't breaking down. So what is it doing? It's doing this. And we're watching out for the potential for some lower heights that could stretch to the eastern part of the United States. I'll tell you the impacts of that in a few minutes. But this pattern is one that locks cold air in place here in the far northerly latitudes. And we need to discuss what that's doing to precipitation first, and then we'll talk temperatures. So I got 2 different maps here, GFS ensemble on the left and the European on the right. The GFS ensemble over here does carry a much wetter bias in through week 2 than the European does. Both of them are keeping an eye on that trough here with the ridge to the south, firing in the moisture into British Columbia, but with a much more active storm track and subtropical jet. And of course, the GFS is almost always at higher amplitude in terms of its wave pattern. It's keeping things much wetter here and then stretching that activity right up the East Coast. When looking over here on the right at the European model, and again, this is only week 2, very similar pattern here in the North Pacific, firing the moisture in around that high that's sitting here. But the difference being the European model is wanting to allow the heights to kind of really trail off across this area. And what I mean by that is no longer giving us the very sharp and immediate rise in heights over the eastern half of the country. And you'll see what that does to temperatures in a few moments, but this produces a lot better upper level convergence and therefore relatively drier conditions into week 2. Doesn't mean it won't precipitate, but just drier. The European really wants to crank things up right along the coastal area, stretching from the Gulf Coast to the East Coast. Could mean that toward the end of the month of February, things get a bit more interesting for the East Coast. But I'm very hesitant right now to go much beyond about 10 days in the forecast when it comes to anything with this pattern, and I'll explain why right here. You see, over the next 5 days, the storehouse of cold is over Alaska, and there are some cold air intrusions, the one like we're dealing with right now that's bringing that cold air into the north central plains, but you saw how short-lived that was. Looking at day 5 through 10, we see very similar pattern here, but we start to notice colder air stretching over a much broader area from the western U.S., stretching down into the south central plains. But as we get out beyond this, take a look at what happens at day 10 through 15. At that particular point, we see the models really wanting to go back over mostly into the configuration they've been in, so I've been highlighting this quite a bit, but we now start to see some cooler than average weather stretching right here, well, kind of across the United States cotton belt. And if we just ask ourselves what's giving us this very interesting pattern, I got to give you a quick teleconnection update here. So this is no change in the stratospheric polar vortex. Expected to continue to be strong, and the Arctic oscillation with it very strong. But we are noticing in the longer range model updates that the North Atlantic oscillation, which is really governing this region right in through here, is possibly heading back towards 0 by the end of the month. Now, what the models have really struggled with and why it's so difficult for any of us forecasting this pattern to break away from persistence is that the models have not been able to handle what's going on in what's called the East Pacific Oscillation. That's what the play is right into, well, in the north of Alaska, the north side of the Gulf of Alaska. So with the changes we've seen there, I'm having a hard time biting into what the model is saying. The tropics aren't really adding much to this discussion. MJO is currently sitting in phase 5-6, which would explain this. But there are some hints that it's going to come out of its phase 5-6 over into phase 7 and 8 potentially. But with nothing else really happening, no El Nino signal, no major change in the Southern Oscillation Index, I just want to tell you to be very cautious with looking at any weather maps right now beyond about 10 days. Remember, I told you yesterday in the long range update, just watch Alaska, because a lot of times the Marches that follow, really cold Februaries in Alaska, tend to let more colder air out in the eastern half of North America. So I know I've kind of scribbled all over this map, but the idea here is that I think the pattern, if persistence is allowed to govern the forecast, will look like this, but we do need to be on the lookout for some potential change overall, as some of the global teleconnections are maybe hinting at something disrupting this pattern moving forward. It is a very tricky one and quite nuanced at this point. So I bring that part of this discussion into close right here. When we get way out in the model, so we often joke and call this La La Land, but we're pretty far out here. We're at the end of the month of February, looking at the GFS ensemble on the left and the European on the right. Some of the things I'm noticing, both models are trying to shift the trough away from Greenland and move it over toward like the Scandinavian area. Now, if that happens, that could change everything with the position of our split flow and possibly be bringing in, maybe a trough that could change the whole pattern for California. This would also, you can see in the GFS, but it's here as well in the European, really crank things up along the East Coast. That's not out of the realm here. And if this does occur, this would shove cold air from Alaska into the eastern half of the United States. But I'm just saying this with a big if. If the models are close on this, I think the East Coast needs to start paying attention to this pattern change. But remember, it is going to be so difficult to break away from persistence, which has been one that's kept the eastern half of North America quite warm. So I just want you to piggyback on what I said yesterday, and I want you to see this latest model evolution because it's going to be critical to our temperature and precipitation patterns. So let's work our way through some details now. Just want to animate forward here through the day on Thursday, getting into the early morning hours on Friday, and then letting this animation finish up Saturday morning. We see the first system exiting here to the northeast, so a lot of snow in the interior. The severe weather threat, although yesterday caused quite a bit of problems in parts of Tennessee, where we had most of our severe weather reports. As this pushes into the Carolinas throughout the day today, this is going to be an isolated thunderstorm event here, sitting along that main frontal boundary. But you notice in the midsection of the country, high pressure builds in behind this, and we're watching the next wave by the time we get into Saturday entering parts of the Pacific Northwest, which honestly through the end of this week has not seen too much in terms of adverse weather. Now, the wave I'm most concerned about will be coming out Monday night into early Tuesday morning. So it will be coming through the northwest and be sitting right here. It's kind of got two pieces to it. So there's one, the main wave sitting back here, but a little short wave sitting right here over the Dakotas, getting into Nebraska. And with that, I want to show you what we're expecting to see out of that little wave as we get into Monday night and Tuesday morning. So we'll pause it here just to let you know, as that high pressure system comes through, Friday, very cold temperatures still in place. But the high pressure shifts east, taking its cold weather with it. And look at how windy the central part of the United States is going to be as we get into Friday night and Saturday morning. But with that high here, that's the rebound in temperatures on those very windy conditions. Okay, so the system I'm concerned about, here's where it sits on Sunday. So it's the shortwaves coming through on Sunday morning through the northwest, such that by Monday it's emerging in the central plains. Now, the model has really deviated quite a bit on the position of this. But we're going to watch for the development of this low here. Remember, we had the main wave sitting here, but a secondary short wave coming right through this section of the country. This is Monday morning, Monday afternoon, and evening. It appears that the two are trying to phase, bringing together a low pressure system that'll sit over Illinois by, midnight on Monday, midnight on Tuesday, getting into Tuesday morning. So our main snow axis will be back here, and you can see that this low pressure system should be relatively low compared to the high pressure cells that are coming out of Canada. So we see right in through here very strong winds again with this system. So the snow that does fall in here, we have the risk again for winter storm and blizzard warnings, just given that it doesn't take any certain amount of snow to get a blizzard, just have to have it. And with these winds, we could make those conditions again. The low then skirts through Michigan, but given its more northerly track, this is going to be mostly a rainfall event. I think if you just kind of draw a line here, let's call it, 90-94, getting through parts of, right here through southern Wisconsin, then dropping down to about I-80. So that is the area on which I think the transition we'll see with this. But that system blows on through. High pressure comes in behind it, another shot at some colder air. It will leave a frontal boundary across the south, which is going to keep things wet there toward the end of next week. And then what we notice is that pattern shift. See how the models are now wanting to crank things up along the East Coast? Now, we have no idea if this is going to happen, but that's what I meant by changing the pattern along the eastern part of the United States. So it's a pretty complicated shift coming up, and we just need to watch a system midweek next week in the midsection of the country. I apologize for the noise in the background here. In my hotel room, I can't control the thermostat very well, so just have to hear the window unit running. Okay, just to show you how good of a forecast we've got on that system, this is now next Tuesday night into Monday morning, and we can see the models are clustering low pressure center right here around Illinois. So got some good signal there from the European model. And on snow, this is going to be the main corridor through which this next system is going to come through and give us that snow. And what you see here is the system that's exiting the East Coast today and tomorrow. So this is the probability of grabbing at least 3 inches of snow through the next week or so. All right. Notice California not picking up snow in the Sierra Nevada. That's an ongoing situation there that I'm quite concerned about. I want to finish with just talking about South America. Let's start off first by looking at the Vegetation Health Index. This is a satellite-derived product. We're looking at 1 year ago today over here, and then what the current map is on the left. Now remember, we cannot use this for Brazil just due to too much cloud cover. So slide down into southern Brazil toward Uruguay, and we can see that southern Brazil growing region this year compared to a year ago does not look as good as it did. Plus, when we come down here to parts of Argentina, the main growing district right in through there does look good right now. But last year we just had more expanse on where we saw a good satellite return from our Vegetation Health Index. So overall, I just want to paint that picture for us. Current soybean harvest is about 12% behind where we were last year, but very close to the 5-year average. And over the next 10 days, the operational models and the ensemble here are bringing in the wetter conditions into this area, but near average to slight dry bias for parts of Mato Grosso. Meanwhile, come down here farther south, Argentina's northern growing area into Uruguay is showing up with the wetter bias, while southern Brazil continues on the drier streak. So with that, I'll wrap it up here. Hope you all have a great end to your week, and we'll talk to you again very soon. Thank you.